Okay, so welcome back to this next video in which we are discussing amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Okay, so we've discussed that amyotrophic lateral sclerosis is a neurodegenerative disease, okay, in which the motor neurons which innervate skeletal muscle fibers are going to degenerate. In addition, the BET cells which innervate those motor neurons themselves are also going to degenerate. Okay, now the BET cells, remember, are the cells which are up in the primary motor cortex, which will send their axons down to innervate the motor neurons, which will have their cell body in either the spinal cord or a cranial nerve nucleus, which will be somewhere within the brainstem. Okay, so to understand this properly, we need to look at the pathway by which the BET cells, which have their cell bodies in the primary motor cortex, are going to get down to the spinal cord and then also to the brainstem nuclei to innervate the motor neurons. Okay, and those projections are the corticospinal and the corticobulbar tracts. The corticospinal tract is the pathway from the primary motor cortex to the spinal cord, and the corticobulbar tract is the pathway from the primary motor cortex to the brainstem nuclei. Okay, right. Now initially the pathways are the same, okay, and that's currently where we are. We've seen that the BET cells, which have their cell bodies in the primary motor cortex, are going to send their axons into the subcortical white matter, and from the subcortical white matter they're going to go into a structure known as the internal capsule. Okay, so now what we're going to do is discuss a little bit of background neuroanatomy so that we can understand where the internal capsule is. Okay, right. So, here is a new piece of paper, and we're now going to start with some background neuroanatomy. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a picture that I hope everyone will be familiar with, and then we're going to build up from that picture to discovering where the internal capsule is. So, the picture that I'm assuming everyone is familiar with is the picture where you look at the brain from the left-hand side. Okay, so we've seen part of this picture before. We've seen the left hemisphere viewed from the left-hand side before. Now what I'm going to add on is a few more structures that will peep out from underneath the left hemisphere. Okay, so here's the bottom of the brainstem peeking out from underneath the cerebral hemispheres. Okay, and then we'll also have the cerebellum here peeking out as well. Okay, right, so let me label up these structures. So this portion is the left side of the cerebellum here. Okay, now the cerebellum is extremely important in the motor system, but we're not going to need it in this video. Okay, the cerebellum is important in calibrating movements that need to be extremely well calibrated to visual stimuli generally. So for instance, if you need to catch a ball, okay, then that's an extremely fine movement. It needs to be extremely exact, otherwise you'll miss the ball. Okay. Now the cerebellum is believed to be very important in calibrating that movement to make it perfect, so that you do indeed actually catch the ball. Okay, right. Other structures that we can see on here, in green, here is the beginnings of the spinal cord. Okay, and I think what I'll also add on to this picture, this little loop will represent the hole in the base of the skull where the spinal cord passes in to become the bottom of the brainstem here, and that hole is known as foramen magnum. Okay, foramen means hole, and then magnum means big. Okay, so it's one of the big holes at the bottom of the brain. Okay, right, and here in green this is the spinal cord, at least the top of the spinal cord. Of course, the spinal cord will go on much, much further than that. We're just showing the top of it here. Okay, other structures then that we have. The continuation of the spinal cord, once you get into the skull, is known as the brainstem. Okay, now the first portion of the brainstem is this portion that I've coloured in red here, which is known as the medulla. Okay, and we'll be looking more at the medulla later on. Okay, above the medulla then, you've got the bottom of the next section of the brainstem, shown here in blue. Okay, and this is known as the pons. Okay, now we can't see the top of the pons, and we can't see the structures then above the pons at the moment, because they're now shielded from our view by the left cerebral hemisphere here, which I'll colour in yellow. Okay, so in yellow this is the left cerebral hemisphere, or another word for it is the left cerebrum. Okay, so this is the left cerebrum. Right, okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to work our way upwards. Okay, this is the picture that I'm assuming everyone is familiar with. What we're now going to do is develop this more. Okay, so we're going to work our way up the brainstem. I'm going to remove the cerebral hemispheres and we're going to continue on up. What is above the pons and what then is above that structure? Okay, so we're going to continue our way up basically and look at the structures that we can't see in this picture because they're buried deep within the cerebral hemispheres. Okay, so the next picture then that I'm going to draw is going to start off from the same structures that we can see in this picture. Okay, so here is the spinal cord. Okay, I'll colour it in, I'll colour code everything. So here in green, this is the spinal cord here. Then above the spinal cord, what we have is the medulla, here in red. Okay, and then above the medulla, you have the pons now that we're showing the full pons there. And then above the pons, the final portion of the brainstem is a section known as the midbrain. Okay, so this is the new structure that we're now seeing, which we couldn't see previously because it was buried underneath the left cerebral hemisphere. Okay, and we'll colour in the midbrain here in pink. Now this is the last structure of the brainstem. So these three structures here, the medulla, the pons and the midbrain, each of which you only have one of and they're sitting right in the middle between the two cerebral hemispheres. These three structures are together the brainstem. Okay, so they're the three brainstem structures. Okay, then the next thing that I want to show is what's sitting on top of the midbrain. Okay, so on top of the midbrain you have the thalami. Now you do not just have one thalamus, okay, you have two thalami. Okay, so all of the brainstem structures, you only had one of those. You had one medulla, one pons, one midbrain, but you're going to have two thalami. Okay, so the one that we are seeing here, because we are looking from the left hand side, this is the left thalamus, but you will also have a right thalamus. The left thalamus is going to be perched on top of the left side of the midbrain, and the right thalamus is going to be perched on top of the right side of the midbrain, and that will become more apparent in a moment. Okay, right, so that's enough for this picture. Next picture now, and we're whizzing our way towards understanding where the internal capsule is. So that's where we're going with all of this, in case it's getting a little bit lost. Okay, so now what we're going to do is look at the midbrain from the top, okay? So I'm going to take the thalami off for a second, and we're going to look down at the midbrain from the top, and then in a moment I'll show you the thalami sitting on top of the midbrain. Now why am I doing this? Firstly, because later on we are going to need to have an understanding of the structure of the midbrain, okay, and secondly, because to go further on towards the internal capsule, we need to show other structures that are sitting on the side of the thalami, and to show that it's better to look at the picture from above. Okay, right, so we're starting with what the midbrain looks like from above. Okay, so the midbrain has a far more interesting structure when you view it from above than it does from when you view it from the side. Okay, when you view it from the side, it just looks like a box. When you view it from above, it looks like Mickey Mouse, okay? And when I draw it, it doesn't really end up looking like Mickey Mouse. It ends up looking more like a pig. But when you see it on an MRI scan, it's easily distinguishable because of how much it does look like Mickey Mouse, okay? So, here, these little appendages that you've got sticking out on the top, these obviously look like the ears of Mickey Mouse, okay, and those are known as the cerebral peduncles. Okay, so cerebral peduncles, and we'll come back to these later on. Okay, the corticospinal and corticobulbar tracts are both going to run through the cerebral peduncles, but for now I'm going to give you some other landmarks of the midbrain, just not for anything else, just to make you appreciate that it does look like Mickey Mouse. Okay, so one of the landmarks of the midbrain then is this section known as the periaqueductal grey, which surrounds a special tube that runs all the way through the midbrain, and this special tube is known as the cerebral aqueduct. Okay, so let me mark this on this picture from the side, okay, and it's going to be difficult because this picture is very small, but running through the midbrain is a tube known as the cerebral aqueduct. Now, this tube is going to contain cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, so it's full of cerebrospinal fluid, CSF. okay, and it's going to be continuous with the third ventricle above, which we'll see a bit more of later, and then also the fourth ventricle below, which sits behind the pons and the medulla, okay, so this will turn into the fourth ventricle here, okay, which will be in between the pons and the medulla, and then the cerebellum, which will be behind here, okay, and then of course the fourth ventricle drains into the spinal canal, which is a tube that runs all the way down the spinal cord, okay, and we'll see again that later on as well. Okay, now, this region then of the midbrain that surrounds the cerebral aqueduct, this is known as the periaqueductal grey. Periaqueductal grey, or some people will call it the periaqueductal grey matter to be full. Okay, it's often abbreviated down to the PAG. P for peri, A for aqueductal, and then G for grey. So I'll colour this in turquoise because I don't actually have a grey pen. Okay, so here in turquoise, this is the periaqueductal grey. Okay, some other landmark structures for now. We're going to have these two processes sticking out the back here. Okay, these are known as the superior colliculi. So I'll colour these in green here. Okay, so you have two superior colliculi. You have a left superior colliculus, that's the singular, and a right superior colliculus as well. The plural is then colliculi. Okay, now you also have inferior colliculi of the midbrain as well. Okay, and those will be further down. So if we go back to this picture, again it's going to be difficult to show because the picture is so tiny, okay, these will be visible sticking off the back of the midbrain basically. You'll have a superior colliculus, and we're seeing the left superior colliculus here, this one, okay, the right superior colliculus will be hidden behind that, and then you can also see the inferior colliculi here. We can't see those on this picture here because they are on a different plane. You'd have to look at the lower midbrain, the transverse section of the lower midbrain, whereas we're viewing at the top. Okay, right, but here are the two superior colliculi, the left superior colliculus and the right superior colliculus. Okay, right. Finally, what I want to show at the moment are the red nuclei, which you have bilaterally like so. Okay, and these look like the eyes of Mickey Mouse. Okay, so here are the red nuclei, which I'll colour in red. Okay, so again you have a left red nucleus and a right red nucleus. I've put my arrow to the right red nucleus here. Okay, right, so that's a transverse section of the top of the midbrain then. Okay, what we now want to do is we want to draw the next picture where we look at the midbrain and see the thalami sitting on top of the midbrain. Okay, and the reason we want to do this is because you're going to have structures sitting to the sides of the thalami. Okay, and these structures are going to be necessary to know in order to understand the internal capsule, because the internal capsule is going to move between these structures. Okay, right, so shall I try and squeeze it in there? No, I won't. I'll draw it down here. Okay, so firstly we'll redraw out the midbrain. Okay, so here is the left cerebral peduncle, and here is the right cerebral peduncle. Okay, and then it will continue on backwards like so. You'll have the left superior colliculus here, the right superior colliculus here, and I probably should have said with the midbrain, this is the front of the midbrain, so this is the side facing the front, and this is the back part of the midbrain. Now that will become obvious when I showed the superior colliculi, but I never explicitly stated that. Okay, right, so on the left side of the midbrain here, you're going to have the left thalamus perched on top, okay, which is an egg-shaped structure like so. And on the right side of the midbrain, you're going to have the right thalamus perched on top. Okay, so I'll colour these in turquoise again. So here is the left thalamus, here in turquoise, and here is the right thalamus, again here in turquoise. Now, note, you will see that there is a gap between the two thalami sitting on either side of the midbrain. This gap is full of cerebrospinal fluid and is the third ventricle and is continuous with the cerebral aqueduct here below. Okay, so this space here is full of cerebrospinal fluid and is called the third ventricle. Okay, right. Now, Why are we showing this? Well, we want to see structures that are sitting lateral to the thalami, which, if we'd shown on this picture here, and we'll go back to looking at the left-hand side picture, we'd have had to put in front of the thalamus. Okay, so this would have made this picture look a little bit more difficult to understand. Okay, so this is why we're looking at the picture from above first. Okay, so bilaterally on either side of the two thalami, you're going to have structures known as the lenticular nuclei. Okay, whoops, I've put this in slightly the wrong position. I want it here more. Okay, like so. Okay, so ignore that line there. I wish that wasn't there. I'll have to show the one on the other side, okay, to make it look more correct. So, unfortunately, the third ventricle annotation is in the way, but this is the lenticular nucleus here. And I should want a line in this position and this position. Okay, so these are the two lenticular nuclei. Okay, and you've got a left lenticular nucleus here and a right lenticular nucleus here. Okay, and the whole thing is the lenticular nucleus. Okay, and it's called that because it looks like a lens. Now, the lenticular nuclei, both of them, are going to be divided into two pieces, okay, which I'll do now. There's the more lateral portion, which I am highlighting in blue here, okay, also shown on the right-hand side over here, okay, and then there is the more medial portion here in orange. Okay, and these two portions have separate names. They're both part of the lenticular nuclei, but they are separate structures. Okay, so this is a name for two structures put together. Okay, so the orange portion that's on the more medial side, this is known as the globus pallidus. Okay, and pallidus has a double L. Okay, then the more lateral portion that faces out, this is known as the putamen. So together, the putamen with the globus pallidus is called the lenticular nucleus. Okay, right. Now what I want to do is go back to showing this picture from the left-hand side. Okay, so rather than looking from above, I want to look from the left-hand side again, so that I can put in one final structure, which is going to be the caudate nucleus, and then we're in the position to describe where the internal capsule is going to be. Okay, so if I draw this picture then from the side, okay, here, well, I'm going to start off by showing the putamen first. So here is the putamen viewed from the left-hand side. So this is this blue structure. We cannot see the globus pallidus because that will be medial to the putamen, and therefore it will be behind the putamen here. So remember, we're looking from the left-hand side, so we can't see this. Okay, now we will see the back of the thalamus peeking out from behind the putamen, because remember the putamen doesn't stretch quite as far back as the thalamus, but we won't see the front of the thalamus here. Okay, so this is the back of the thalamus here. Okay, right. Now, the new structure then that I want to put on here is now the caudate nucleus, okay, which is going to loop around like so. Okay, so I'll put the caudate nucleus on. So it's going to touch the putamen here, then it's going to loop right over the putamen here. It's going to then loop all the way back round and down, like so. And it's going to be doing this bilaterally. So this is the left caudate nucleus that I'm showing here, but you will also have a right caudate nucleus on the other side. So I'll colour the caudate nucleus in purple here. Okay, and it should have been above the thalamus, okay? So ignore that portion of the thalamus, you wouldn't be able to see that. The caudate would be obscuring that from view. Okay, so all of this in purple here, this is the caudate nucleus, the left caudate nucleus specifically. Okay, right. So, the last thing that I want to put on this before I put on the midbrain is, before I put on the internal capsule, is the midbrain. I want to put the midbrain on. Okay, so the midbrain will be under here, like so. And I'll draw it in dashed lines here. It'll be behind here as well. Okay, remember the thalamus is sitting on top of the midbrain. Okay, right, so let's now discuss where the internal capsule is going to move. The internal capsule is going to go between this space, in this space between the caudate nucleus and the putamen here. So this in blue, this is the putamen. Okay, so the internal capsule is going to be in this position here, and it's going to consist of loads of axons coming down from the cerebral cortex and coming through this space here. Okay, so this is a great big white band of axons, okay, and that's what the internal capsule is. Okay, so all of these axons that have come down from the primary motor cortex, okay, from the BET cells in the primary motor cortex, they are now going to come through this internal capsule here. And where are they going to go after that? They're going to go into the cerebral peduncle of the midbrain. Okay, they're going to go in down here, basically, into the midbrain, which is why I wanted to put the midbrain on. So going back to our picture of the midbrain here, okay, the furthest forward portion of the cerebral peduncle, okay, this portion here and this portion here, has a special name, okay? This is known as crus cerebri, which literally means the root of the cerebral hemispheres, okay? And these white matter axons that are coming down from the BET cells in the primary motor cortex are going to come into this region of the midbrain. Specifically, they're going to come into the middle 1/3 of the crus cerebri, okay? So this portion here is going to contain the axons of these BET cells coming down. So basically, the axons of the BET cells are going to come down from the cerebral cortex into the subcortical white matter. Then they're going to go through the internal capsule here, down behind the putamen and the globus pallidus here, and into this portion of the crus cerebri here. Okay, this middle 1/3 of the crus cerebri. Okay, they're going to go in there, and then they're going to descend down in that middle 1/3 of the crus cerebri. Because remember, the midbrain goes down. You know, it's got a thickness. So they're going to descend down through the midbrain here, and then they're going to go into the pons right at the bottom here. Okay, and we'll discuss that next portion of the corticospinal tract in a moment. Okay, and it will be doing this on the left and the right hand side. So you have the left primary motor cortex and the right primary motor cortex. On the left primary motor cortex, the axons will be coming in to the left internal capsule and then going into the left crus cerebri. Okay, in the right side of the brain, the axons of the right primary motor cortex will be going into the right internal capsule, which is completely symmetric to everything that we've seen here. Then they'll be going into the right crus cerebri, which is here, okay, and then they'll be going down like so. Okay, right, so far what we have actually discussed is true for both the corticospinal tract and the corticobulbar tract. Now it's when it's going to start to differ between the two, okay? All the fibres are going to come down through the crus cerebri, but then when we go into the pons, things are going to start to get different. Okay, so what we're going to now talk about is just for the corticospinal tract, okay? So we're going to describe the corticospinal tract, we're going to continue this pathway on, see the corticospinal tract, and then we'll move back onto the corticobulbar tract. But knowing what we know now will make the corticobulbar tract much easier to discuss. Okay, so we'll do the corticospinal tract, we'll see the continuation of the corticospinal tract in the next video.